So Grant, thanks so much for talking to me today about these unusual circumstances that we're in with COVID-19.
My pleasure. Glad to be here.
Now, one of the reasons why I was so keen to talk to you today is you've got a lot of experience in unusual situations, particularly in dealing with trauma, and also strengthening people so that they can be as resilient as they possibly can be. And also, you've worked as a clinical psychologist for a long, long time. So you've got all those clinical skills as well.
Well, yeah, although I hope it wasn't not that long time.
Yes, well. So I thought it'd be really helpful because I know you've done some stuff with the police in improving their resilience.
Yep. So in resilience training, my first lot of research was doing analog studies where we actually showed people some pretty bad videos of paramedics attending a road traffic accident, real accident, and some of them we had what we hypothesized to be mechanisms to help them resolve what they saw, and then others they got what we called tea and biscuits, and we went that through, and we found that the treatment group, the resilience group, actually did seem to do a lot better. So we then translated that into working with police, and we got people as they came into the academy, and they either got our resilience training or training as normal, and then we followed them up over time. One of the big outcomes we have from trauma research is that generally, the more traumas you go through, the more symptoms of PTSD or trauma symptoms you get. There's a little group of people that seems to be able to throw anything at and it doesn't stick. Now, if we could distill that, that's the holy grail. But in this one, we had one lot that had the resilience and one had the training as normal, and we followed them up, and we found that we could break that link in the resilience group between those who had had traumatic events and trauma symptoms. But in the training as normal group, the correlation between trauma symptoms and traumatic events was still there.
All right. So what can we learn from this then? How can we help ourselves get through this in the best way we can?
Well, it really depends on which group of people we're talking about. Excuse me. So we know generally the two biggest things. So if a good example of an at-risk group for trauma would be doctors and nurses. And we know that the two things that tend to predict trauma reactions are, number one, where it's unexpected, and number two, where they have a sense of a lack of control. Now, that doesn't mean that people need to have the control. It means that they've got to have a sense of control to buffer up. Which is why, for instance, at the moment, the people going in, they know what's going to happen. So we've got that expectedness. They know there were people in hospitals were getting ready, particularly in Australia, were gearing up for what was to come. But the lack of control, it could be something that is given focus. So a good example is if they don't have personal protection equipment. That could be for them a sense of lack of control. Now, whether it makes a difference or not, it at least gives that general anxiety with the situation a focus. And so what we want to do, obviously, is to give people a sense of control. If it's available, making sure they have these equipment, which involves asking them, what can we do in this situation to give you a better sense of control? So with the police, we actually asked them, in your training, what would have helped you deal better with what came up? So what we did was we introduced people going to the morgue, seeing dead bodies. So the first time with the police, they saw a dead body wasn't out on a call, and so therefore it didn't come as a shock. We took them to the morgue. We had experienced officers actually talk them through what to expect, so they didn't have that shock value. And then we gave them self-coping strategies to actually cope with this what they were seeing, whether that be self-talk, whether that be breathing exercise, or tensing exercise, just to stop them from fainting if they were to see a dead body, and which we found quite useful. So we can do those types.
Can I take you back a little bit then, Grant? Because so you talked about control and expectations being critical. And so I'm guessing at the moment we don't have, well, I guess we've got control over whether we go out, whether we wash our hands and this sort of thing. What kind of control should we be trying to exert over our lives?
There's two aspects there. There's the trauma side and there's the isolation side.
Yeah.
And one of the key, when I did a literature search on this, where really we came up with an awful lot of opinion as opposed to evidence-based. But the one thing that does seem to come up time and time again is that one control we can give ourselves is to give ourselves a schedule, to actually, so that we can actually have different parts of the day. We're used to getting up, getting ready. We have the commute part. Then we very often have the at work part. Then we have the coming home dinner part, and then we have the evening part. And we've got to keep that going, and to actually give ourselves breaking up the day. Now that can involve, say if you're not working, say that you have lost your job, still breaking up the day, and to give yourself in each part of the day a job and to pre-plan it. One of the things that we don't want you to do is to write down a list of all the jobs that you need to do while you're at home and then get them all done in the first 2 days, because then that leaves you with a sense of ennui for the rest of the week. What we would suggest is have one project, one job a day, so that you have a sense of achievement for that day.
Right. And so if this is going to last a time, then how would you suggest managing those jobs over time? I mean, I have to admit, I have done a lot of my jobs recently, and I am starting to feel, like you say, well, what now?
Yes. I've got the opposite problem. I'm doing my academic work, for instance. If I can use myself as an example, I've got my academic work that I get along with, and I have students still to supervise like this. But then we've got an old cubby house outside that I'm renovating so my wife can do telehealth. She's a clinical psych as well, so that she can actually do telehealth from the cubby house, which involved putting in a whole new floor, cutting out the old one that termites had been through. But I only had one section that I did a day, to the point where my wife was saying, "Are you ever going to finish this?" For me, it was, I didn't want to just get up in the morning, just go at it all day for 2 days and then have nothing to do. I use it to punctuate my day.
I see. So we have to pace our work, so we don't, I guess, so we don't burn out like in our everyday work if we were in everyday work.
Yes. One of the worries, of course, is with doing online, is that we have a different type of burnout. We have a different type of well, one of the big issues again is a lack of sense of control. Having training, knowing how to use the technology, these sorts of things also help, of course. And really, in my mind, how I break down how we deal with this is by person who's running the organization, a worker, a family, and children.
Mm-hmm. So Grant, we've talked about how important control and expectations are. How does this relate to people in work and our work environments?
Look, I think there are, from reading literature, people have broken it down into two areas. The first one is a leader, what makes a good leader in this situation, and how people interact with that leadership style and progress. Overall, it seems to be that the best leaders are people that are act quickly, are decisive in that acting quickly. So you can act quickly and be indecisive. but you actually want to act quickly, be decisive, explain why you're doing it, and also you want to cultivate a sense of trust, so with sincerity, so that needed changes can go through. Actually, in summary, Groucho Marx very nicely summarized it. If the secret to life is honesty and fair dealing. If you can fake that, you've got it licked. So that was for the leadership style. You're also, one of the things that people are very good at discerning is lack of sincerity or ulterior motives. Using a scenario to get through a change that was wanted for a long time but would have been unpalatable. People can see through to that quite a lot. A big area where people know that organizations are going to have to cut back because of the lack of through flow with money. So people are trying to cut back. A very sinister cutback method is to say we're putting you on 0.8, which of course means working 4 days a week rather than 5, because everybody knows that means you're going to still get 5 days a week worth of work. So the 0.8 fraction is the one that everybody tries to avoid. I would advise leaders, if they need to cut back, that they don't just do the 0.8. There is the chances are, if they're doing 0.8, then they actually are maintaining a business and need the full business. But if it's explained well, if it's necessary for that job, and if it has a leader who has those properties that we talked about before, then that might be acceptable. But I would warn leaders and businesses against using the current situation to get through unpalatable workforce practices that they wouldn't have got through before, because when people return, that they can come back with a large sense of injustice, and that normally isn't very good for a workforce.
So it would work in the short term, but in the long term, it would have negative effects.
Yes.
And so what about staff themselves working from home and this whole new environment that we're in? I mean, we're both working from home at the moment.
Yep. Look, the first thing is to actually, rather than, one of the things that interact with a leadership and the workforce is there's got to be some give and take between that, and that includes bottom-up information. So the workforce has an in-depth view of where they can save, where they can make things easier. When I was going to university, just before and during the holidays, I used to work on building sites to get money and I discovered quite quickly there was the people who thought they were the leaders, and they were the architects saying, this is how the building's going to be, and this is what we want, or this is how it should be. And then we had the engineers or the site agents who actually thought, well, this is what can be done. But really it came down to the chippies and the brickies who would tell you why you shouldn't do that. And so there was a movement backwards and forwards there. And it's the same with this. People will tell you, you actually need to ask them, what is it that will make this better? What is it that we can do for you? What training do you want? Working with the Queensland Police a while back, they were directed to do walkthroughs through pubs and clubs in every single city. And of course, there hadn't been much training on what to do and how to do that. So they actually contracted us to go out and find out what training they needed, what equipment they needed, what changes in processes they needed in order to do this. And this is no different. We're changing a culture, we're changing a workplace. And so getting it back the other way, what training do you need? Do you have the facilities? If we're using Zoom like we are at the moment, everybody had this amazing short-term learning curve of how to actually use it. It was reasonably intuitive. Other people who aren't IT literate won't have that ability. And of course, the other thing about work is people. There are some people who can't work from home. You know, if you are a mechanic keeping one of my neighbours, he's a mechanic and he particularly works on trucks, a diesel mechanic. He's got to go out and keep the trucks rolling so that services and merchandise can get through. So they're going to need different things. In his particular case, you know, that he actually had somebody give him a lot of hand sanitizer for a start off, but also just the idea that people have to stand back from him. And a good way of doing that is to start off with a mask on, and then when he first met someone, and then take it off when he actually had to do the work, because the mask just reminded people just to stay back.
So, I mean, presumably you'd also suggest trying to get structure wherever you can into your work life as well. And what about the kind of the problems of it seeping into your day-to-day home life, as it were? That's
right. Well, look, the main one is when I talked about earlier on about keeping certain parts of the day, segmented, or keeping a structure. Particularly with partners, have time apart so you're not under each other's feet all the time. So, you know, if you normally work, you know, you don't see anybody until lunchtime, then have that work time in the morning. Mm-hmm. Have your two separate places if you can, if you've got the room, and then come back together for lunch and then go away again, and then so on. You could, if you have children, take turns in looking after the children. At the moment, it's Easter break, so most people were planning on doing something at the moment anyway with the kids. Unfortunately, they now can't travel, they can't go out, they can't go to the playgrounds. All the soccer, all the different sports have been stopped. So now they've got this time, and they plan for time with the kids, but now they're there constantly. So I would really advise taking breaks with who's in charge, and really let that person be in charge during that period and disconnect from the scenario.
Well, that's an interesting one. I mean, certainly one. I'm looking out of my window at the moment, and I can see families wandering past. You know, it's kind of it's very different to how things were previously, when you've got, you know, often a mother and a father and two children wandering past. It actually is quite nice. Right?
Yeah, and look, and to keep it nice, I would keep it at the moment. It's about 12:30 midday. The idea is if they've done their morning individual stuff and then at midday gone out as a family for a walk, and then when they go back, then do separate again. People in each other's company constantly, no matter how much you love them, they will get on your nerves and you will get on theirs.
And what tips have you got for avoiding that?
Okay. Obviously, I would set up ground rules, because there are going to be arguments. So in couples therapy, one of the things we do is actually set up a time where we're going to discuss if there's issues that are arising. Now, in order to be able to do that, we've got to have active listening. And that means clarifying during a discussion. So say you say, right, 5 o'clock on Wednesday, 5 o'clock on Friday, or whatever, that's when we can discuss. And it's time limited, a problem. And then during that period of discussing the problem, one person speaks at a time. You have to wait until they get to the end. And then you have to sum up before you add on what you wanted to say. So you have to make sure that you've heard them right. This is the ideal. I could ask you very similarly. I know you're a lot of expert in crime and domestic violence, and I hear people saying in England that domestic violence has increased. I'm not sure whether that's the case here in Australia. I don't know the statistics on that. I'd throw that one back to you.
Well, it appears to be going down at the moment from what we know. We're not entirely sure. It's a bit early days, and of course, many people don't report to the police. So trying to find out the ground truth about what's going on is incredibly challenging.
Yeah.
You'd think that, as you say, being in contact with someone who you don't get on with will make things worse. But maybe, yeah, as you're saying, Grant, that, and I'm not talking about domestic violence per se, but some of those strategies that you're talking about for people who don't have abusive relationships could help strengthen the relationship.
That's right. I would, again, just thoroughly recommend the breaks away and the coming back together. If you've got nothing new to say, it'll grow stale pretty quick. So at the moment, I know people, there are dogs around that have never been walked so much in their life. So first the husband takes them for a walk, then the wife takes them for the walk, then the child takes the dog for a walk. So
it's a great time to be a dog. My dog has never been happier. We're all here all the time. He's walked all the time, played with, trained. He's living the dream at the moment. So
the other thing I'd advise when we have family, we have partners that are in close proximity and they need to solve a problem. If one has arisen, is to besides having those times when they discuss the problem, they actually have, if the discussion starts to get heated, they have to both have the right to time out, and that time out can be time out for an hour, but don't leave it too long, not until tomorrow. You know, so you can come back and discuss it, because without us becoming angry. And then if we do have, if we can't agree, then we put the issue to the test. What is the test that we can do to check what is the cause of this problem, or what is the solution to this problem? And then you, like a scientist, and you go about it that way, and then have a defined time when the testing is up and a decision is made.
So can you give me an example of what that test would look like?
Sure. So say I'm doing all the housework around here and you're sitting there watching Netflix, and the other person thinks that they do quite a lot of housework, and they see the other person sitting down there watching Netflix or on their phone. Phones are always a point of contention now. And so in that particular scenario, you say, right, okay, over the next 2 days, we will keep a log of how much Netflix each of us have done. They've got to keep their own log. And there's not any nagging in the middle. Hey, did you write that down on your log? It has to be left up to that person. If they're not keeping to it at the end, then that's another issue. And also you would keep a log at the end of the day. You'd write down what you have done. What people normally find is that they actually notice their own contributions. So we tend to maximize our own contributions and minimize others' contributions. And when it's in black and white, that actually competes with that heuristic that we use, that cognitive distortion that we've done everything.
Well, that's an interesting one. I mean, I can see how that would work, and you're very aware of what work you're doing around the house, and maybe not so much about your partner. But it does seem that it might actually make things worse if it gives you ammunition to argue about, doesn't it?
Oh, well, yeah, and if it is true that one person is doing all the work. It may well be at the end of this we find a lot of divorce rates going up. We don't know. If one person only is doing the work, then that is an issue, and it does need to be addressed. And if the other person is unwilling to address that, then we have to look at whether. Sorry, I've just realised my door's just come flying open as the ghost of Christmas past.
So it would seem from that, Grant, then, that if you are going to do these tests and you are going to see what each other are doing and to make sure that it's equal, then you also have to be doing it with being prepared to act on the results. As in, if you're not doing as much, do more, or talk through things could be more equitable, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And analogy I sometimes use is, if you're so if you've, for instance, if you've been eating lots of chocolates and you've put on lots of weight, and you physically could see the results of that, and you didn't want that, you would act on that result to change it. You
Mm-hmm.
would stop taking that. You would exercise more. You do what you need to do. A relationship is very similar. It's not something that just should magically be okay. We have the first parts where we have we have the blind love, and this is the person. But then there comes a point where you're dealing with other human beings that have peccadillos, and we must address them.
I guess related to that, we've also, we might be living with people who've got different attitudes, and I'm thinking in particular about introverts and extroverts. That this does seem to be, this isolation does seem to suit introverts much more than extroverts.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if you've got any suggestions, particularly for those extroverts.
Okay. Look, there's a few things here. One of them is that came up. I'll come back to the extrovert per se in a second. But there are people that are saying, that sportsmen are saying, well, I'm losing all my skills. I can't do these things now. I can't go out and play rugby. I can't go out and do these. I can't go out and play basketball, what have you. Psychological research has shown that a good strategy is to use visualization. Actually, back in the 60s, there was a nice little study where they had 3 groups of people with basketball that were basketballers, and one group they were called the lazy group. So that was no practice at all, and I think it was for about 2-3 weeks. And then there was a second group that actually went out and practiced every single day for, I think it was 15-20 minutes on just doing free throws. And then the third group they didn't go out and physically take the shots. They actually they used a visual guidance system to imagine themselves taking the shot. The idea being, can visualization transfer into muscle memory? And then at the end, they then got people to actually take the free throw shots. And as you'd expect, the people who did nothing, they had no increase in their accuracy. But the other 2 groups were identical in their increase, which was I think it was about 23 and 24% increase.
Wow.
So we can have these, if you can't physically get out there, actually not just sitting down mulling it over, but actually imagining what you would do in a scenario can actually have an effect.
But will that help an extrovert who wants, social contact? I mean, they'd imagine that they're at a party, they'd imagine them with their friends.
No, a good example with say, for instance, with children, you have extroverted children and introverted children that actually, what do I do? My kids are going up the wall, and my other kid, there's quite happily sitting in the corner drawing. I have a friend who's a very good teacher, and he had in his class groups of lads that he could tell after about 20 minutes were starting to lack focus and were looking around for something else to do. And every 20 minutes he would break, that group would go for a run around the oval, come back and work, and he actually was able to prolong their concentration that way. The same with this, rather than just letting the kid who's an extrovert sit behind playing FIFA on the Xbox or Fortnite on PlayStation or whatever it is. There is a mental extroversion aspect there that they can do, but they actually need to physically go out. And that means it could be doing something in the garden if they have one. In my household, everybody's become very good at table tennis. It's something that they can set up in the lounge room if necessary, and play table tennis. All you need is the net. You can even make up a net with books, but just having a physical activity punctuated between other less demanding activities.
So going back to that routine.
Yeah, actually, I just wanted to add a couple more things in relation to children. One thing that's obviously will become a big issue is how much screen time that they spend. And really, as we start going back to school and people doing online teaching, they're going to be spending a lot of time behind computer screens to interact and to possibly learn. And then on their off time, they're going to be wanting to play Fortnite, what have you, on screens as well. I would be very careful as a family to decide what is an appropriate time and how much they actually play one particular game, particularly during the holidays as well. Keeping it to whatever the regular, during the holidays, whatever the regular time that you have as a family for the weekend for them to play. And when they go back to school, as if it were a school day, it might only be an hour, it might be 2 hours at night. I would highly recommend not starting off the day with gaming, but you know, that's for a family to decide. We don't have much evidence base on length of time. The other thing that's related is I'd also be very careful about online bullying. The normal bullying at school obviously has changed over the years. When I was at school, bullying was about the big kid hitting the smaller kid. Nowadays, it tends to be more intellectual and social bullying. And now, when someone is already isolated physically, they can be bullied in a second format online by social bullying, again by people getting other people pulling away from an individual, that sort of thing. And it's something that I would keep an eye on as a parent. And I would report to the school as if it were normal bullying. If this was occurring to your child, I would report it to the school as if it were normal bullying. They're still responsible during the daytime for the other kids' behaviour at the school.
So I guess this relates to my next question. If someone in your family isn't coping that well, what's the best you can do for them? What's the best things you can do for them?
Okay. If they're not coping well, one of the things that we do have is you can still see a psychologist. We use telehealth now. So we do this, what we're doing now. And we're now training our students in telehealth. Most practitioners have gone to telehealth. There are still those facilities that people can access. They can get a referral from their GP. A lot of the GPs are using telehealth, so you have to use the telehealth to actually go and speak to the GP. They will write a mental health plan. They will refer you to a psychologist, you can, if you have a preferred psychologist, you can go that way. You can phone up the Australian Psych Society to get a list of people they recommend in your area. Or you could go onto the AHPRA, AHPRA, AHPRA website and see list of practitioners, and you can get referred to them. Many practitioners will bulk bill. So we have a general psychologist and a clinical psychologist. They get different payment schedules, and so you need to clarify whether there's a gap that you need to pay.
And also with the other things that you suggested, like getting a routine, helping them, I guess, through a routine and plan things and involved in projects, would that be kind of something you'd encourage them to do as well?
Most definitely. All the stuff we've talked about before. And the other thing I'd like to also just quickly, you've touched on it before, is with children. We have the introverts, the extroverts, how we still keep physical and mental agility. We're also going to have the issue of online schooling, people taking part in that. And that's going to throw up technological challenges for some people. Webcams. You can hardly get webcams anymore at the moment because everybody's buying webcams, or they've already bought them out. Then there's actually getting it set up so that they can access it. Not everybody has the internet. Not everybody has fast internet. people that are on acreage, people in the country, you know, they might be relying on satellite, they might be relying on a slow ADSL, which wouldn't enable them to do this. So there were challenges there. And then for the younger children, there's the challenges of explaining what is happening at the moment, why it's happening. The best one I've seen was a person who was trying to explain to their child who wasn't understanding about the germs being spread. And they actually got them to, they put some food dye on some Play-Doh. And so it's quite sloppy, and they got their hands in it. And then they got them to just act normal. And then at the end of the day, they went around and saw where all the hands had been. And so they could demonstrate how see how this little bit of food dye is being left behind. That's what happens with germs. And in our household, we're sharing these germs. So what one of us has, most of it, all of us probably have. But other people coming in might not be, might have different germs, and we might react to them. And so at the moment, while there's a dangerous germ out, we're keeping separate. Of course, what worries me is, are we generating an entire generation? Are we creating an entire generation of people with obsessive compulsive disorder later times?
Well, yes. I mean, you think with the hand washing and, you know, the avoidance of people and contact. I mean, you'd have to also think that people with these disorders must be really suffering at this time.
Yeah. Well, one of the points of a disorder is it has to be causing them problems, and it has to be unrealistic. So it's not a disorder if what you're doing is condoned by society, reinforced by society, and is seen as useful to society.
Absolutely. Yeah, an interesting point there. So Grant, what are your top tips for getting through this?
Okay, first of all, control and expectations. Have some sort of control over the situation, whether that be learning new skills, acquiring products, or the leader of the organization makes these changes so that their workforce has some sort of control over their environment, and they have appropriate expectations for what the future is going to be. Of course, not everybody knows what the future is going to be in this scenario, but at least for their workplace, giving regular updates. So that's controlling the expectation side, particularly for at-risk workers such as nurses, doctors. With everybody else, I would say also have a routine. Stick to the routine, and during that routine you have morning, what your normal routine would be, and punctuate your day that way, and make sure that you have at least one job, one task per day. Don't do all your jobs and all your tasks in the first 2 days. You'll have nothing to do for the next week. So try and punctuate them out. Have something physical and mental. During a workforce, during a work day, we might be sat at our desk like I am at the moment, but then I would have had to have gone to work. I would have had to walk up the hill to get there. I would have been walking around. I might have gone to the gym. I might have played tennis, what have you, which we now can't do. So still keeping that physical component. We can still do that, whether that's exercising at home on a trampoline, or it's running on the spot, or just doing press-ups, whatever that physical component, and the mental component as well. Learning a new skill is always a great thing to do during this time. And the last thing I would strongly suggest is having time out from each other and as a family, so that you, in your routine, you have time when you are away from your partner, away from your child, and then back again, and then away and back again. You need to keep that time out and come back in as you would normally. Any person, any sane individual that is in a lockdown with one person is they're going to annoy each other at some point. Minimize that and also come back with new stories. If I would ask one question of you, Mark, and that would be, what do you know, is there any research about the how people deal with isolation in prisons? Because certainly we've got a whole history of putting people into prisons and putting them into segregation. How do people deal with that? Do people deal with it well? And what can we learn from them?
Well, I guess one thing we know is that our prisoners do tend to be quite adaptable, and particularly after a couple of weeks, they tend to adapt well. And also because, of course, the alcohol, drugs, those kind of parts are diminishing, and they're getting used to the routine. We know that they really do like routine, and they actually really like doing prison work if they possibly can, to break up the monotony. Where they find it really hard is if something goes wrong on the outside, like say if their partner decides they want to leave them, or if someone dies, then that's when they have these real kind of trigger points. It's actually interesting how some people can function much better in prison than they can outside of prison, with the structured routine, the absence of alcohol and drugs, and the fact that they have to behave in a certain way, otherwise there'll be consequences. And I guess there are some lessons there for us as well. As you were saying, routine, doing some work, having some challenges. If something goes horribly wrong on the outside, that's the one that's difficult.
You raised two very good points there. One is when something goes wrong outside and you can't get to them, as people are finding now. They can't even get to funerals. They can't fly over places. And the second thing you raised there is use of drugs and alcohol during this time. And I know a lot of people are concerned with the amount of alcohol they're drinking, because having a wine with dinner is becoming problematic when dinner starts at 2 p.m.
Yes, that's right, isn't it? And I guess that's that structure of work as well, isn't it? You have a structure of tasks you have to do before you can have a drink.
Yeah.
But,
I would also add with that, to add on with drugs and alcohol. If you normally are having, or if you would normally drink X amount of days a week, you don't increase on that, and you have a set amount of alcohol you drink, and you don't increase it. Keeping a track of that would be good.
I see. I mean, there could be a slippery slope where it just increases a little bit every day until it ends up an awful lot.
That's right. And we know people who are depressed as well tend to drink more. And the more you drink, the more you become depressed. The more depressed you become, the more you drink. And this goes along with anxiety as well. If people have a general anxiety about scenarios, they may well drink more as well. And I'd suggest that be taken into account.
And that might be a link that they're not so aware of, because it's not simple, immediate. It's an immediate cause and effect. It's kind of something that can maybe taking place over a longer time period, so less easy to understand that it's contributing to anxiety and depression.
And we don't know how long we're going to be in this scenario for.
Yeah. One thing I did find quite fascinating, Grant, was at the beginning, people started stockpiling those essentials and, of course, toilet rolls. And then as things progressed, then they started stockpiling alcohol. And I know you and I are both big fans of Maslow's hierarchies of needs. And it did seem to be people progressing up that hierarchy from, okay, I've got my food, I've got my toilet rolls. What do I need now? Oh, I need my drink.
Yeah. And with the toilet roll issue, people are wondering, why is that occurring with the toilet roll? I think that's a product of also the commercialization of a product. It's sold as a luxury item, has soft puppies jumping around. And so if people are worried if they're going to be isolated, they want some luxury, and they were looking, well, what gives us that? And then, of course, once you get a run on a product, it creates its own life. You then have the contagion, which then spread. So I remember when this first happened, it was Australia that actually had the run on the toilet paper first, and England were shaking their heads. My friends on groups I was on with WhatsApp shaking their heads about why are they doing that. Now it's England. The shelves are bare. There is no toilet paper, and that sort of scenario. So that contagion can take on its life. Yeah,
it's fascinating how quickly it went around the world.
So yeah, we're a global village still.
Yeah.
Perhaps more so now.